The first thing I noticed was the smell. Paper doesn't really smell like anything until it's been somewhere it shouldn't, like the dusty tang of an envelope that sat against radiator heat too long. I could smell it coming off the letter in my hand on a pale January morning, when the light slanted hard off the kitchen tile and the coffee had gone bitter in the cup. My name was printed cleanly, Ms. Mara Ellison. But the salutation didn't bother with the living. It welcomed the estate of, as if my breath fogging the window made me a ghost trespassing in my own kitchen. I didn't call anyone at first. I did what you do when the floor tilts. You look for the nail that's popped. By the second paragraph, I had my nail. Pursuant to notification received, your status is deceased, the bank's letter said. On the screen of my phone, while I balanced the letter by my elbow, my account app loaded an error. This client is deceased, in gray polite font. Meanwhile, $482,000, the exact figure, sat flagged in the corner of my father's trust sub-accounts, a number I knew the way you know the weight of your own hand. A distribution clock ran beneath it, 72 hours. I refreshed. The red deceased tag didn't blink and the number didn't change. When a machine decides you don't exist, it doesn't wait for you to argue. It prints, it schedules, it routes. I stepped to the sink. The water ran cool because the building never got the radiators right until late morning. The tile under my feet still held the cold. I listened to the street. Somewhere a truck's reverse alarm beeped steadily, steady as a metronome. In the living room, my phone vibrated across the console. 19 missed calls stack as a simple block of text. But it sounds like a flock of birds trapped behind glass when you keep the ringer off. 9 from my sister. Tessa, 5 from a number I recognized as my Aunt Ruth's house line. The rest from unknowns I did not pick up. I pulled the blind and watched the light change. Then I cleaned the counter, wiped the coffee ring, and took my father's mint green folder out from behind the cookbooks. The originals lived there. Trust certificate, the deed to my apartment before the condo board took over and converted the documents. His letter in his tidy engineer's hand. My father used to say, "Blueprints begin as originals because a copy can only tell the truth if the original does." Who I am is the girl who ran her hand lightly over the blueprint table in his studio, that slope of glass and warmth, while he traced lines so thin they looked like hair. He ran a small architecture studio out of a walk-up over a florist on Court Street. The place always smelled like peonies and ammonia, like the two ends of tenderness. I used to go after school and lay my cheek on the cool paper until he tapped my head with the plastic triangle and made me move so he could draft a roofline. Once, when a contractor tried to change a wall spec by photocopying the plan and penciling in a new measurement, my father put the dirty copy on the counter. He drew a circle around it and wrote, "No authority." Then he sent a letter on letterhead with a blue ink signature that the contractor would keep in a file forever. "If they want to move a wall, they ask me for a change order," he said. "We are people who ask, because we stand on originals." Years later, when he was dying, he asked me to sign my name next to his on a trust certificate that moved certain assets into a simple arrangement. Taxes handled, distributions clear, a letter of instruction with my name on it. He died on a Monday in late spring. The peonies were out again and the ammonia was still ammonia. Ruth, my mother's older sister, brought sandwiches and a list of names she wanted looped in. Tessa cried until her face swelled. I cried like someone who'd used up most of her crying in the ambulance, and now was just learning how to carry a new weight. The lever my family chose later wasn't complicated. They filed a death. Not his, but mine. Somewhere a clerk took a form that didn't belong to me and fed it to a scanner that stamped it with something like power. They filed a power of attorney I had not signed, granting Ruth limited authority to assist with estate wrap. They drafted an apartment assignment as if my rent-stabilized lease were a coat you hang on someone else's shoulders when you're cold. Tessa sent an email with pre-transition in the subject line to my father's banker, routing the $482,000 into an LLC, Ebb Point LLC, registered to a P.O. box in Whitestone. When they say they mean people like you. So when you read they, you'll feel implicated. I felt implicated. I thought, of course. The shift was not a single moment, but a series of thin papers that added up to a weight I had to push against. There was a withdrawal slip, Cumberland Avenue branch, $9,600 drawn in cash, signed by someone whose version of my signature was a little too neat, the loop of the R in Ellison too careful. There was the email chain my cousin forwarded from a Gmail account that used my name with an extra dot in it. Chirpy tones about just getting this wrapped, and pre-transition payments. There was the screenshot, crisp and brutal, of my bank profile with "deceased" stamped like a rubber mallet in the top right corner. An agent had sent it by mistake to my friend in compliance when she asked why my debit card kept failing at the bodega. The DMV clerk, kind eyes, nails painted a pale yellow, tilted her head when the screen showed her the block. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "Someone did you wrong." My office keycard went dead. Our family Dropbox papers, the folder with Dad's studio archives, gave me a 403 access error. 17 times I tried logging in, and on the 18th I understood. It wasn't a glitch. It was a strategy. I had an ally because I have a habit of learning people's names and remembering the things they tell me matter to them. Her name was Lena Soto. She worked behind a glass window on the second floor of the Surrogates Court building on Adams Street, a place so beautiful it feels like a lie for any of the sadness it holds. Lena was the one who noticed a mismatch in the file that had my name misapplied to someone else's death. The date, she tapped with a pen cap. "It says you died on December 3rd at 11:14 p.m., but your driver's license renewal is December 4th at 9:22 a.m. Her lips did a small, surprised smile like a door clicking open. "Originals talk. Copies confess," she said, as if she'd been waiting all morning to say it to someone who would care. That sentence sat in my ear like a metronome, a steadiness I could use to keep my own hands from shaking. Originals talk. Copies confess. I asked Lena what I could do, no more than that. If you talk to the right people the right way, they will volunteer more than you ask. She shrugged in a precise way that implied boundaries she'd learned to keep, but her eyes warmed a shade. "Bring what's yours," she said. "Don't email. Bring the paper. Make them see you," so I moved one brick. I laid my father's mint green folder on the table and opened it. Trust certificate with the original blue signature, the building's letter on the letterhead confirming my tenancy, the deed history, the certified copy of my father's death certificate. I printed my health insurance claims for December 3rd and 4. I printed my MTA tap history. I printed a photo taken by the cashier at the bodega on the corner at 9:31 p.m. on December 3rd. Me grinning, a stupid paper hat tilted over one eye because it was his birthday, and she wanted a picture. I printed a copy of an email from my father to me, dated 2 years ago, with his line in it. Blueprints begin as originals. At the bank, I asked for the fraud department. I did not say the word fraud. "I have a status problem on my profile," I said. "I'm present," I said, and they heard the word through the shield of policy. The man on the phone gave me his name, Julian, and an internal ticket number, and he gave me a fax number that still, in 2025, exists. I faxed my continued existence to him line by line. Originals talk. Copies confess, I said into the empty kitchen as the pages slid. At home that night, I turned my phone over. 19 missed calls had multiplied. Some messages were keening. The sound Tessa makes when she feels cornered is high, like the start of a fire alarm. Some messages were flat and blank, Ruth's voice when she's reading from a script. One was a thing like poison. "Mara, let's be adults. The apartment is better used by someone who needs it." The next morning, I took a cab to the building management office. "They can't assign your apartment," the manager said, tapping his pencil against an empty coffee cup. "Your lease isn't even assignable without board consent, and we haven't—" He stalled, glanced at an email on his screen, and then looked over his glasses at me. I waited. "Well," he said slowly, "someone tried." "Someone," I repeated. He nodded. He printed the email chain. The subject line: Assignment of Unit 5B, effective immediately. A PDF trailed after it. A notarized tenant's notice of assignment, bearing a signature of mine that had the wrong slant. "That's not your hand," he said gently, almost apologetically. "We've seen worse." He looked at the paper like it was a bruise. "You still in 5B? Here is where I confess my own secret. I wasn't. I had sold the apartment 2 months before, quietly, for reasons that included an offer that solved a problem and a feeling that the walls had begun to hear too much of my loneliness. The papers were filed, my boxes moved, the paint freshened. I was sleeping in a sublet a few blocks away while I figured out my next move. I'd left the mailbox forwarding, held the keys in a ring on a hook by the door like a promise. I didn't tell my family because there are some truths you get to savor in private until they ripen into the kind of boundary that doesn't bleed. When my sister and Ruth showed up at what they believed was my apartment with a moving truck and 2 men in gray hoodies, somebody else opened the door. Her name was Anita Patel. She had a dog with white eyelashes, and she wore a sweatshirt with paint on the sleeves. The men in gray hoodies held a dolly and a mattress like a question. Tessa said my name louder than the hallway needed. Anita listened. Then she called the super. If you've ever seen a boundary drawn, you know the sound. It is quiet. The super's voice didn't rise as he explained the sale had closed. He tapped the door with the back of his knuckles like people do when they love a building. When a paper is the right paper, the door behind it stays closed, and the people who were so sure they owned the hinge realize they're just holding air. I wasn't there, but I saw the footage later because Anita had a doorbell camera, and I watched Tessa's face change. That's the thing about a mask. It slips not because someone tears it off, but because it does not quite fit. When the police arrived, 2 officers who looked chilly and bored, one of them's body camera caught the on-record moment where Ruth said, "We have authority," and Anita said, "Show me." And then the officer, whose name was Chavez and whose scarf had tiny red anchors on it, said, "Not to me, you don't." I did not call Tessa back. I took Lena's advice like a medallion I'd hung under my sweater. I walked the papers into court. The building on Adams Street is limestone and hush. The benches are hard and keep your spine honest. A court officer, a woman with a braid the size of a rope, scanned my mint green folder with one swift glance the way nurses can tell if a person is bleeding by the color under their nails. "You have originals?" she said. I tilted the folder forward. Blue ink looked like a small service flag. The hearing, when it came up on the docket, had a plain name, in the matter of Ellison. The judge was the kind of person you'd want to take in a storm, small, with eyes that read like clean glass. Ruth's attorney cleared his throat in that way certain men have rehearsed to convey both gravity and grievance. Tessa sat 2 rows back, hair scraped into a bun that made her look younger and harder at the same time. I sat straight. I had put a pen in my hair like I used to do in my father's office. "Counsel," the judge said without much ceremony, "explain why I have here a declaration of death for someone who appears to be seated in my courtroom." He didn't look at me when he said it. He kept his eyes on the man who had cleared his throat. That's what quiet justice looks like. It gives attention to the person who used it up at the wrong time. The lawyer began to speak. He said miscommunication, and expedite and time-sensitive distribution. He said good faith. He did not say Ebb Point LLC. He did not say 19 missed calls. He did not say my name quite right. He clipped the A so it sounded like mar as in the verb, to spoil, to scar. "Ms. Ellison," the judge said, finally sitting back like he'd given the room's noise all the rope it would need. "Would you like to be heard?" I stood, because if you've been raised by a man who taught you how to draw a door you can't step through until you've earned the hinge, you stand when it's your turn. "Your Honor," I said, and my voice sounded calmer than I felt. "I have here the trust certificate with original signatures, the building's letter, and other proofs of presence." My hand didn't shake when I set the folder on the rail. I have been marked as deceased on bank and agency profiles and had my apartment arbitrarily assigned. I'm here. The $482,000 distribution is flagged with a 72-hour window. 2 of those days have passed. The judge nodded once, a small bow to the number. "Counsel," he said without taking his eyes off the blue ink. "Anything to add that would prevent me from entering a provisional order vacating any death declaration relating to Ms. Ellison, freezing distribution activity, and scheduling a formal hearing on the validity of any purported agency?" The lawyer on the other side tried to speak, but he had come to an empty well. His mouth opened and closed once. He said. The family, the judge repeated as if he were tasting the word to see if it held sugar or grit. He nodded to the court officer. "Mark the record that Ms. Ellison is present. Ms. Ellison, you have originals today?" I held up the folder. "Good. Originals talk. Copies confess," he said wryly. And if Lena had been in the room, she would have liked how the sentence echoed. They read certain filings into the record. The officer switched on a small digital recorder with a click that felt like the sound paper makes when it yields. The bank's compliance investigator appeared by video and spoke in paragraphs. The way people who read policy out loud speak, exact, with the almost tender cadence of a person who believes a sentence can be a shelter. "We have flagged a series of attempted transfers to Ebb Point LLC," he said. "We have instituted a fraud hold on the $482,000 sub-accounts. We have corrected the status error in the profile to reflect Ms. Ellison as living." I swallowed. It is a strange thing to have your life re-enter a database with a sentence. It is also not strange at all. Somewhere a light flips. The machine hum changes frequency. We will not act on any authority other than the original trust documents we now have scanned from Ms. Ellison's submission. Ruth asked to speak. The judge let her. She wore a suit that had never been hers. You can tell by the shoulder. We were only trying to streamline, she said. It's very complicated, this paperwork. We wanted to help. Tessa needs a place to live. The apartment— Stop, the judge said almost kindly. The apartment is not yours to assign. That is the end of the apartment discussion. He looked down, and when he looked back up, he was the person the room had made him into. Ms. Ellison, the court grants a temporary restraining order preventing any transfer of the $482,000 until we determine the validity of the purported power of attorney. I am vacating any declaration of your death misapplied to your record with this docket number. Counsel, you will instruct your clients to cease any representations of authority over Ms. Ellison's property or accounts. Do you understand me? The on-record element matters because there are days later when you forget how it sounded, and then you can press play. The court's audio has a faint hiss under it like a seashell if you press it to your ear. You can hear the moment someone says your name and means you. Fallout comes like weather. Notifications flood. My email populated with alerts from the court system, from the bank, from an online directory correcting my status. A compliance note arrived with the subject, hold confirmed, and an 8-digit code. On my phone, the numbers of missed calls stacked into a block so large it required a swipe. 19 by noon, 19 again by dusk. The texts were a smear. Call me. Why are you doing this? And everyone knows you sold out, and this isn't family. On a platform that rewards the dramatic and punishes the precise, my aunt posted a paragraph that said everything and nothing. Pray for those who forget where they come from. I typed nothing. I posted nothing. I made a receipts thread, 5 screenshots. Chronologically, the bank deceased screen, the mint green folder open, the building manager's email saying not assignable, the Ebb Point LLC registry listing a P.O. box, and finally the court docket line. Order, status corrected. Temporary restraining order granted. Then I put the phone face down and went to the florist downstairs from my father's old studio. I bought peonies even though it wasn't the season because the florist kept a few in the back for people who needed mercy. For him? She asked, and I nodded. For me, I said, and she smiled like she had been waiting for me to say that. The decoy mattered because sometimes you need the person who wants you empty to think they've succeeded at making you so. 2 days before the hearing, I had walked into the bank and asked for something simple. I need a cashier's check, I said. The teller prepared it, a polite rectangle for an amount. I left it on the counter, filmed the destruction of it with my phone, and dropped the strip-cut pieces into a tiny bag that sat in the bottom of my mint green folder. The real transfer that protected the core of my father's legacy had been filed 3 months after his death, Quiet Harbor Trust, a name I chose on a night when my breathing had steadied in small increments. The recorded message my father left me, I had never told anyone it existed, lived on a flash drive with a brass key fob. If I taught you anything, he said in a soft voice full of wire, I hope I taught you to build the roof before it rains. When you watch a mask slip, you learn how fear makes people move. Tessa came to the sublet, which she didn't know was not the apartment, and rang the bell until the buzzer burned out. I did not open the door. The super stood in the lobby and chewed a toothpick and said, "You need to leave," without once raising his tone. Later, I watched the body cam footage from the day at the old apartment. Officer Chavez said, "Ma'am, if you come back, the building will call 911 for trespass." He said it twice, and on the second time, he made it sound like a kindness. The second hearing was less cinematic. That's the part stories sometimes skip, the slow return to accuracy. Papers get stamped. An affidavit slides into a folder. The notary's seal presses against a page, and you don't see the seal, but you feel the paper thicken. Ruth's lawyer conferred with a separate attorney whose face had the expression of someone tasting milk gone sour. They produced a power of attorney with my signature, and Lena lifted her eyebrows at me in a way that meant, watch. The judge held it up. "This is a copy," he said. "Where is the original?" The other side began to shuffle. "We only have the copy," they said. "Originals talk. Copies confess," the judge said again. Not like a joke this time, but like a sentence he was adding to the wall that would eventually keep me safe. He ruled, The court formally vacated the misapplied death designation on my record and directed agencies notified of the error to correct it. The court declared the power of attorney presented null, void, and of no effect. The signature mismatch analysis from a forensic examiner, a woman with a microscope and a polite way of dismantling a lie, sat in the file like a small hammer. The bank's $482,000 remained frozen, then reseated in Quiet Harbor Trust under my stewardship as originally intended by my father's document. The building issued a letter that I posted on the hall board. No reassignment authorized. Unauthorized entry will be treated as trespass. The decoy check had been destroyed. The real vault was always elsewhere. I walked out of the courthouse into a thin new light. Snow had decided to fall without hurry. It made the cuffs of people's black coats white and softened the edges of the granite. I dialed one number. Not Tessa, Lena. We got it, I said. I heard, she said. In her voice, I heard what it cost to sit behind glass and watch other people's storms. Take a picture of the order, she said. Frame it. Then, and go get a coffee, I did. I sat in the window of a place on Willoughby and watched a pair of kids spin in the snow like new coins. My phone stayed face down until it vibrated with a text from an unknown number that began, Ms. Ellison. This is Julian from the bank. I let it buzz. Let the note add itself to the symphony of a city that can't help but hum. After a while, I pressed play on the court's audio recording and listened to the judge say my name. There is a quality to hearing your name said in a room where people are paid to be careful with the truth. A small quieting of the animal part of your brain that's been on wrong alert for too long. I did call Tessa later. Not to fight. To say, here is the boundary. We're sisters, she said, and it sounded like a currency she was sliding across the table. Yes, I said. And I'm alive and I am not available for theft. Silence sometimes is brittle, but this one was soft, like decaying leaves. You think I wanted this? She said, and I realized she meant the not having, the wanting, the ache that made her press her face to other people's windows. I think you wanted what was not yours, I said, and that is its own kind of wanting. We can be in each other's lives when you stop wanting what is mine. For once, she didn't have a script. What am I supposed to do then? She asked. Ask, I said. And make your own. Pull quote. I am not available for theft. There is an image I carry now. It is a small brass key, the one for the safe deposit box, mounted in a shadow box with a strip of paper beneath it. Quiet Harbor Trust. The key doesn't look like much. It's almost ridiculous with its little teeth, like a thing you find in a cereal box. But when the light hits it in the late afternoon where I hung it by the window, it throws a shape on the wall that looks like a line I once traced with my father's plastic triangle. Not a roof line, a boundary line. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I take the mint green folder out and run my finger along the edge where the cardboard has begun to fray. I think of the smell of peonies and ammonia and watch the shape the key's shadow makes crawl a little as the sun goes. It is not a triumph. It is steadier than that. It is just the feeling of being correctly named in the places that matter. There will be people who read this and want a tutorial. They will want steps and lists and a way to guarantee a victory 22 minutes long with a sponsor at the end. I can't give that. What I can give is this: the weight of paper in a mint green folder, the sound of a court officer's digital recorder clicking on, a bank email that begins, hold confirmed, a judge who says vacated with a small nod as if he can feel a knot loosen somewhere in your chest, a stranger named Anita who opens a door that no longer belongs to you and says, you need to leave, and the world agrees. The rest is just waking up and making coffee and realizing you have $482,000 of your father's mercy to steward, because you did not let someone else assign your life to themselves. The morning after the order, I went to the old studio. The florist had set peonies in a mason jar with water so cold it made the glass sweat. I climbed the narrow staircase and pressed my palm to the glass drafting table. The glass was still cool, still clean. I put my cheek on it like I did when I was 13 and waited to feel my father's triangle tap my head as if to say, move. Instead, the tap came from my phone where Julian's email sat with the subject, status correction completed. I didn't need to open it. I knew what it said. I pressed my cheek back onto the glass and watched the light across the room. Outside, a truck's reverse alarm beeped steadily, metronomic. When machines place you correctly, they do so without triumph. They simply return you to the flow of ordinary time. On my way out, I taped something to the studio door. It was a small print of a sentence in my father's handwriting I had found in a folder. Ask. I think of Tessa sometimes when I pass that door, and I think of Ruth, of the way we all learn the wrong lesson about how to get what we need and what we learn to want. And I think of Lena behind glass, of a judge with eyes like clean glass, of Anita with her paint-sleeved sweatshirt, of Officer Chavez's scarf with tiny red anchors, of Julian reading policy out loud like a prayer, of the florist saving peonies for Mercy. I think of the way I said I'm present to a phone line and the way a person at the other end took that as a thing to carry, not a thing to dismiss. There is a last image I leave you with because stories don't end at the courthouse door. If they did, the world would be a set of orders pinned to a corkboard. The key in its shadow box sits on my shelf. At 4:20 p.m. on clear days, a sliver of light slips through the fire escape slats and lands on the glass. The light turns the key into a small sun. If you didn't know what it was, you'd think it was nothing. If you did, you'd understand that it once opened a box where the originals lived. Originals talk. Copies confess. The light warms the wall. I breathe, and the light moves, and somewhere, paper breathes with me, heavy and true.